the number of small businesses receiving federal contracts has decreased by 50% over the past 10 years.
It is just two legalese.
Just to get in to submit a price, there is tremendous burden and overhead.
Why say it in 94,000 pages when you can say it in one?
We like good news up here, so that's I appreciate
That is good
that.
news.
We're kind of arch rivals. I will bow down.
It's pretty bad.
This is probably the most effective 75 minutes I've had in Washington in quite some time.
Oh my God, what are we doing here again?
Today, our subcommittee will focus on several critical issues facing Main Street America. First, the number of small businesses receiving federal contracts has decreased by 50% over the past 10 years. Further, nearly 60% fewer small businesses are entering the federal contracting system. Second, the regulatory burden placed on small businesses that seek to enter federal contracting is too high. And finally, third, we intend to address the systemic failures in the federal acquisition process, which undermine small business participation in contracting. I'm thrilled to introduce our first witness here today, hailing all the way from my neck of the woods on Long Island, Mr. Joe Spinosa. Thanks for being with us today, sir. Mr. Spinosa is the vice chair of ADDAPT and former co-owner and vice president of business development at East West Industries. Our next witness here today is also a very qualified Long Islander, too, Mr. Joel Lipsky. And Mr. Lipsky is president of Lipsky Construction, located in Bayport, New York.
It is truly my pleasure to introduce our final witness today, Mr. Bob Taylor. Mr. Taylor is a decorated veteran of the U.S. Air Force and is the founder, CEO, and sole owner of Alliant Healthcare Products.
Mr. Spinosa, in your experience, what are some of the unique challenges that small businesses encounter when navigating the Department of Defense procurement process?
Thank you, Chairman. The challenges are as have been stated by other testimony here, daunting. You run a small business, you do the best you can to get everything together. These regulations that come in, as I said, require attorneys to come in and help translate from legal speak to business speak and execution. And small businesses don't have attorneys on staff. It's expensive to do that and even bring attorneys in to go through this. And in the end, you're trying to figure out, at times, people come in and quote, irregardless of what the regulations have in place, they ignore some of the regulations, and the government doesn't pick that up. You need to be able to have the regulations readily identifiable and clear to the businesses so that they adhere to that and everybody's on a level playing field. That's really what it boils down to.
So when you have to spend money to hire counsel to help chew through those 94,000 pages worth of regulations, where do you pass those costs off to?
It's got to get passed back through the parts or, through the non-recurring costs. It's got to go somewhere.
So with the less than a minute I have remaining on this round of questioning, what's the best solution to that?
The solution, to me, is the regulation has to become more plain language. It is just too legalese.
And we're going to stick with cost. And Mr. Lipsky, sir, can you discuss some of the costs associated with a company like yours when you're bidding for a federal contract?
Similar to my colleague here, we spend a tremendous amount of time just qualifying for the bid opportunity without any assurances that we're actually going to be awarded that project. And I think that's what he was trying to say, is that there's just to get in to submit a price, there is tremendous burden and overhead that is not guaranteed to be recovered. That goes back to the corporation's overhead. I also do not have an attorney on standby, although the joke in my office is that she's the second highest employee within my company.
Just as a point of privilege, Mr. Spinosa, I could not relate more readily to your fervent insistence on plain language. My team knows, everyone who's ever worked with me knows, I am a firm believer, if you can't explain a concept in plain language, you don't really know what you're talking about. I am with you 100%. The SBA needs to just put these regulations in much more easily understandable terms. Why say it in 94,000 pages when you can say it in one? Beginning with Mr. Taylor, can you speak to your experiences in meeting the specific requirements when contracting with different agencies?
Congresswoman. The issue is that it's not only agency specific, it's contracting tool specific, and then it's contracting officer specific. So each contracting officer is allowed to interpret the language in the federal regulations independently of others. And each contracting tool has separate regulations and requirements separate from others. So there is no consistency at all on how to work with each federal contracting or contracting officer.
So access to capital is great for the big guys and for the primes. And it's almost impossible for you because we've made life so difficult for the small banks that you bank at, your community banks. You can't get capital to provide these subcontracts that you've signed up for. So this is a real problem that we have to get through. And I'd like to ask Mr. Spinosa, can you explain the importance of subs to national defense very quickly, 30 seconds?
Subs to the primes are their primary blood flow of parts. Whatever prime you pick, the small businesses are probably 60 to 70% of what they're seeing, similar to what DoD sees, because it's the same type of stuff, the same type of parts, the same type of services.
Mr. Taylor, I know that you're so-called Democrat witness here today, but I see see three men up here with small businesses whose job is to provide for their families and for their communities. First of all, thank you for your 17 years in the Air Force. I'm not sure why it wasn't 20, but thank you for doing it. And I see a man who's trying to make money and provide for his small family. So there's not a chasm here of Republican versus Democrat or Biden administration versus any other. You have a bureaucracy issue that prevents you from providing in a way that would add real value to our nation's economy and to your bottom line.
So, Mr. Taylor, when the SBA recently took over certifications for service-disabled veteran small business owners from the Department of Veterans Affairs, how was your experience with that transition, and what's the SBA's process like?
Congressman, I have a very recent experience with the transition. This was probably our sixth certification process as an SDVOSB, and we just went through the process in January. And we submitted our data and all the information. It was quite a bit of information that they wanted, but we were happy to supply it. And shockingly, we received our certification in 2 weeks. And so that is months improved over what it was when it was in the VA. So the change to the SBA for that certification process has been, in my opinion, one of the best examples of what can be done.
We like good news up here, so I appreciate
that is good news.
I appreciate that.
So to both Mr. Spinosa and Mr. Lipsky, to the extent that you've had experience with SBDCs, and I know that you have, what has been that experience? What understanding exists of what SBDCs provide, and what support do they provide? And then to the extent you want to offer some recommendations on how they can improve their work, we're open to that.
Yes, I can comment on this. So the associations like the Associate General Contractors also has the New York State chapter, which also represents a lot of the constituents upstate as well. Okay. The problem that I see with small businesses, which are the second-tier subcontractors and suppliers, is that governments have competition to private. So if there's a opportunity to get a deposit in advance and to get your money out on something, they're going to go for that versus entering a state agency or a federal contract. So I think that the SBDC, as far as the partnerships, the small business partnerships, helps try and bring those people into the market, but also poses a challenge because you guys have fierce competition on the private side.
Sure. Mr. Spinosa?
Yes. Experience with the SBDCs as well as the MEPs are important, very important from the manufacturing side. I believe overall they're trying to do a good job. The problem we run into is, again, funding disappears to those organizations very quickly. I'll give a quick example. Cybersecurity, trying to achieve CMMC evaluation, starting the process to become cyber secure. I know that the MEPs have run out of funding to put into that effort, and that's Mohawk Valley is a cybersecure expert area on the MEPs, and they have run into that issue time over time over time. And that, again, just delays small businesses getting the process started, getting themselves ready, and entering, because the cybersecurity aspect is being pushed as a barrier to entry from both the government as well as the primes. If you don't get yourself cyber secure to 800-171 or CMMC, you are not going to be able to continue.
We had a hearing yesterday. It was all about just regulations on small business. And the National Association of Manufacturers say 12% of our economy, and of course, small business is the backbone of our economy, 12% is based on just trying to comply with regulations. So hats off to each of you running small businesses. Mr. Lipsky, you're an outlier because most people that are from New York moved to Florida, but you were in Florida and then went back to New York. I totally understand because you went to school in Jacksonville. And hats off, I went to Jacksonville, you went to the University of North Florida. We're kind of arch rivals. I will bow down. You won the River City Rumble this time. Has it ever been this bad, in your opinion?
It's pretty bad. You know, just qualifying for some of these programs. I mean, we just heard one niche, which is cybersecurity. To get even entered into submitting a proposal is pretty bad. So I'll yield my time to some of my other colleagues who might be able to weigh in on this.
Mr. Spinosa, so for the record, you said it's pretty bad. So we'll take that as an answer. Mr. Spinosa, what say you? What say you? Has it ever been this bad?
It
regulatory?
has not been this bad.
It's not.
It has not been this bad. It's hard to explain the confluence of all the different things that are happening. And to go towards your bill for a moment.
Yeah.
The government has tried to come out and do things and say, oh, we're going to do this better than industry can do. And every time they've gone through that, they've found that they can't do it as innovatively, as effectively, as economically.
Yeah.
And the flip side is the organizations themselves try to show, obvious, you don't want to show failure on things, so they try and make it look like a success.
Yeah, so if you remember, you would sign on to that bill is what you're saying.
Absolutely.
And so small business, you look at every little number. And that's why you run a tight ship. Mr. Taylor, what say you, my friend? Has it been this bad before?
So I've been doing this for 20 years. I've seen a lot of ebbs and flows. I'm sorry. And so I think the one thing that makes this period worse is the direction that we're going. We seem to be heading in an even more difficult direction, and that's what causes me the greatest concern.
I know it's tough for small businesses to get into these federal contracts because the prime contractors already have a lot of the market. What advice would you have for us to help make that better?
Thank you very much, Congresswoman. I would say that obviously the regulations need to be trimmed and I'm going to say common language so that the businesses can address those. But more to the point, there's a short-term issue, which is the businesses are in tough times right now. I'll give you an example. Fixed price contracts, the long-term contracts that the government has done to try and control things. Businesses applied normal incrementing of pricing as you go along based on I'm going to say on assumptions. We are in a time of crazy interest rate increase that is killing small business. And the primes and the government are not going back and allowing the businesses to do equitable adjustments based on that.
Essentially what I'm hearing is, what advice do you have to fix the problem?
Yep.
And as much as I can do it to cash flow and regulation tape, I think the two big pieces of advice that I can contribute today is to continue to have open discussions with the private sectors and the people who are affected, which is what we're doing today, and to listen to the partners and the associations, such as the Associate General Contractors. We are a great resource in order to provide representation on hundreds of thousands of employees and all the subcontractors that they represent. That would be my biggest advice.
I just want to make sure we put a fine point on what you're saying, so you don't feel like the federal government is currently listening adequately and responding to your concerns.
I think that this is a very good start. I haven't personally seen it myself previous to this, but I appreciate the open invitations to be here today.
Yeah, I also don't think the federal government's adequately listening, so thank you for bringing that up. Mr. Taylor?
Congresswoman, the first point I want to make is I didn't show up here today, nor do other small businesses look for a handout.
Right.
I firmly believe that we offer the federal government innovation, cost effectiveness, the ability to do things that large businesses cannot do. We're more responsive, we're faster, we're more adaptive. I'm not asking the government to say, here's something for you. What I would recommend is that I think there are laws and goals in place, but the large businesses and primes need to be held accountable to those.
So my question with respect to China, innovation, patents, how can the DoD better harness the innovation of small businesses in the defense industrial base?
I think, and it kind of boils down to, I'm going to give you just a couple of words on this. Number one is transparency. Work together with us. That's the important aspect there. It's so close to the vest that there are things there that will, even in the commercial area, that has application to help things out, and they're not getting there because there's no transparency. I think the other aspect, and I'm going to call it this way, the government needs to be less adversarial. The DoD needs to be less adversarial with the small businesses and be more parental with their, look, we got a problem here we need to handle, and let's take care of that. Because when that does happen, and it does happen within certain groups, there's certain services and their program offices that have that culture. When it happens, it is wonderful. Things happen quick, happen effectively, and happen economically.
Looping back into what we talked about in the first round with respect to the bureaucratic burdens that the federal government places upon you, would you agree that if we relieved you of some of those burdens, we would free you up to even be more innovative than you already are?
Quite simply, if a business is spending X amount of money just trying to keep up with the regulations and that kind of stuff, it's money for a small business that can't be applied to its facilities, to getting the right people, the right engineers, et cetera. It's, as I said, it's non-value added costs that just don't do anything for our warfighters or the government or whatever the application.
What good is the SBA doing, and how can we ensure that it continues to do that good work? We'll start with you, Mr. Taylor.
Congresswoman, I think over the years, I've seen what the SBA does as very positive. I see a lot of good that comes from the SBA. My only issue is that they don't have enough authority or standing in the federal agencies to execute the laws and the requirements that they're giving to the industry. So I don't see a lot of dysfunction in the SBA. I see them as kind of the beacon in the forest for helping small businesses. Yeah. I just wish that they had more authority, and I don't know if it's a desire, but something needs to happen so that the voice of the SBA carries more weight.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you. Mr. Lipsky?
My experience with the SBA is a little limited, but I will comment on some of the private clients that I have who use the SBA, one of which is James Bonanno of the Tap Room, who owns a restaurant on Long Island that you may know of. He uses the SBA quite effectively in getting his funding to have his construction projects and restaurants expand in the Long Island, New York area. So I'll yield my time to Mr. Spinosa.
Congresswoman, I think the SBA is not the one to blame on this. I think, you know, obviously regulations, we'd like to see regulations more plain language. But more to the point, it's more about the actual implementation. And again, that to me boils down to my comments from Secretary of Defense. All the points were there. The recognition was there. How it gets down to the troops, when I say the troops, the services, the procurement, the acquisition people, and gets implemented. That is where it all, the rubber meets the road. Sometimes it's great and it's wonderful, and other times it's like, oh my God, what are we doing here again?
This is probably the most effective 75 minutes I've had in Washington in quite some time, which isn't always saying much, but truth be told, this dialogue that we're having is quite important. I appreciate the witnesses for having taken their time to prepare their testimony, prepare the issues that are important to your individual constituencies, and coming here to Washington to inform this committee of that. If there's no further business, without objection, the committee is adjourned.